Greetings, my dear friends. Once again, I, Commander Chakrapani, your Chaks, am back. And this time I'm back with Lieutenant General MJS Kalo. General Kalo has a very, very vast knowledge and history and the abilities he has shown almost everywhere. But why am I doing it? Let's get General Kalo to say it. Kalo.
Morning, folks. I am General MJS Kalo, Manu to my friends. And today, I and Chaks have got together here to take a little look at what's happening on the US-Iran front. And as we speak today on Sunday morning, the talks have apparently failed in Islamabad, and the American delegation is winging its way back to Washington. And we would like to discuss on all the various aspects of those talks, and maybe take a deep dive into what now comes next when we are doing some amount of crystal gazing.
Absolutely. So, while Manu speaks about the talks having failed, one positive that one can draw out from here is the fact they at least spoke. They talked to each other rather than talking at each other. That's an important positive for going forward. But let's try and do this because Manu is going to be a longish conversation. So we'll try and divide into three virtually independent buckets, if you will.
Fair enough.
One will start with the belligerents and the other important actors in this entire game. Then we'll come down to the peace talks themselves, the main points that they had, discussion, some places of agreement, some places of absolute divergence, and finally we'll do that crystal ball gazing, what happens next.
So just to put into perspective, yesterday I believe the talks lasted for about 21 hours.
That was huge.
And they were held in 5 rounds of talk with some meal breaks and some coffee breaks in between. And the mere fact that the Americans have accepted the 10-point formula put forward by the Iranians as the basis for negotiations is actually a huge plus. And we will now see as to what were the major agreements and disagreements, because nothing has really come out in the public. The US Vice President made a very, very brief public statement for about 5 minutes where he said we tried, but apparently the red lines were not being met on both the sides. And so the mere fact that they spoke for 21 hours, they could have walked out after a couple of hours. That means there's a better understanding on both the sides about each other's positions, and those positions are maximalist, and we'll see as to what now happens next.
Absolutely. And just look at the Iranian delegation, 71 members, which means they came well prepared. They came with a lot of ideas, lot of thoughts, lot of agenda points in their mind. And interestingly, they had their Treasury Secretary equivalent. He was there. So very obviously, money was topmost or among the topmost points. But we are going a little ahead of ourselves. Let's take a step back so that we understand this conflict a little better and come down from there. Let's look at the main belligerents. Essentially, they are, in a way, Iran and Israel. US is there along with Israel. Then you have the Gulf GCC nations, as they are called, the 6 of them. Then, of course, you have China, Russia, and of course, finally, how can we leave out the wheeler dealer, the Hira Mandi, Pakistan? And how does this involve India? So, why don't you set the ball rolling and let's talk about Iran first. Where do you see Iran? Because don't forget, Iran at one time was great friends with Israel. This was during the times of the Shah of Iran. And Iran was among the earliest nations to have recognized Israel. How did this entire relationship start? Where are we now? And what is Iran's perspective in this war?
The interesting part, Chaks, is that as a matter of fact, even today, when they are at war, one of the largest Jewish pockets of population actually exists in Tehran. They have synagogues there, and as one of them was actually hit by the Israeli airstrike recently.
That's right.
And so the relationships have started post the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Things have gone down south. They've gone down south because Iran feels that the Great Saturn, that the US, has been playing a role of dividing the regional countries into various blocks, and the unconditional support which the Americans have been giving Israelis has actually led to a complication of factors. We'll come to them one by one as we go across. So with that as a background, we find today that the US states that after this about 38, 48 days of fighting, the Israeli military, the Iranian military has been degraded to a large extent.
Right.
It's true. The Navy has been very badly hit. Iran didn't really have an air force to kind of speak of. But if you look at what is still, very, very capable, is that the land forces have remained largely untouched.
Right.
Their drone and missile capability is still there, and we see it every day playing out on our screens of being able to actually carry out precision strikes in the GCC countries, Israel, and further on. And they have managed to keep, with this particular kind of a capability, they have managed to keep the US Navy at bay, which is not, the US Navy is not operating in close proximity of Iran as we speak. So there is yet the resolve and the resilience displayed by the Iranians has actually really come as a surprise to everybody. Everybody expected that after the Venezuelan interdiction by the Americans, that with the shock and awe of the force being used by the Americans, the Iranian regime will collapse, and and they will be able to walk in and effect a regime change. But the resilience of the Iranian regime has really come as a surprise to many.
Absolutely. Many people, including me, say Iran will win this war by just not losing. How true is this?
That's a fact. Since Iran today is holding all the major cards, as they have already stepped into negotiations, and the main card which they are holding is actually the fate of the Strait of Hormuz, because through Hormuz the entire world is getting impacted, and the economies of the world all around of all countries are getting adversely impacted, including us in India. And we find that till the time this logjam is broken, and there's no way to break this logjam through air power alone, which is what the Americans have been trying to do, they have managed to cause a very significant amount of degradation in Iran. But the capability of Iran to block the Strait of Hormuz remains intact as of now.
Absolutely. And just look at it like this. Iran, what you rightly said, is negotiating from a position of strength. Its two aces, if you will, or two trump cards, but two trump cards are the ability to control Straits of Hormuz and the question mark over that 420, 440, 460, whatever number it is, kilos of 60% plus nuclear material, its nuclear program. It has demonstrated strength in significant innovation, if you will, as far as a nation with no real air force, no material navy, has still in an asymmetric war literally pushed everyone backwards, including US, with its drone saturation attacks, very cheap drones taking out very expensive anti-drone missiles, interceptors. So yes, it is. But what are the internal threats as far as Iran is concerned? Because don't forget, this is a radical and a very, very despotic regime. In the January, you want to call it revolution, you want to call it a revolt, whatever. There are people who claim over 40,000 Iranians were killed in just 1 month, over 100,000 jailed. This 40,000 is a sum total of all combatants across from last year to this year. Those many people have not been killed. Their regime, I don't know how legitimate it is. People are on the streets in favor, that's because they fear the Basij and the IRGC. But is there a breach or is there a problem within the IRGC itself? What are your views?
See, if you see each of these components separately, I think the total number of armed forces of Iran, including the IRGC, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, and including parts of Basij, to my mind, will total up to about less than 700,000 as from open sources.
Right.
In which the IRGC component is about 1.5 to 1.8 180,000 personnel, and most of them, IRGC actually operates independent of the Army, Air Force, Navy.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
And the IRGC was the force which has been designated to protect Iran in a manner by involving all external powers to show that, starting from Hezbollah and other forces operating in Iraq, Syria, and maybe even parts of Hamas, that the IRGC was given a very, very clear mandate, which the Iranians learned after their 8-year war with Iraqis, that the war, they should not allow the impact of war to come onto mainland Iran and maybe fight their battles outside Iran.
Much like the US.
Much like the US. Much like the US. So that, based on that strategy, IRGC was created. They have established militia forces of different kinds, and they are aiding and abetting them, not only within these countries which I have just named, but including in Yemen. So they have the capability of actually being, what should I say, their influence actually is across the Straits of Hormuz in various countries.
Right.
So that's why they play a very credible role, and they report directly to the powers that be. They do not go through the armed forces channel of reporting. So their loyalties are independent, and these people have very, very intimate ties with the regime, and so therefore their loyalties is that's the reason why the regime has not come apart as we speak.
Absolutely. And you can, folks, you can look at IRGC something like the PLA in China. The PLA of China is supposed to protect not China, but the Communist Party of China. IRGC is not to protect Iran, it is to protect the regime in Iran. That is the basic thing as far as IRGC is concerned, and that is why IRGC stands above the Army, Navy, Air Force. It also stands above the President of Iran.
As a matter of fact, the interesting part was that the Iranian delegation, which you just mentioned earlier, was headed by their Speaker of the Majlis.
Yeah.
And the Speaker of the Majlis was an ex-IRGC man, right?
Correct.
And,
he was general there.
He was a general there, and he's also been a mayor of Tehran. So the point which I'm trying to put across is that they have multifaceted ties with the regime, and so the IRGC thought processes are embedded in the system, and the IRGC is actually going to be the main force which is now taking on Israel and also causing a lot of damage in the GCC countries.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let's take a look at the next combatant. Let's take US, because that is the most powerful of all the combatants that are here. US has plenty of bases in the Persian Gulf region. It has always said that Persian Gulf is a very key area for itself. It has over 50,000 personnel here. In this current situation, there are 2 aircraft carrier fleets that are operating here. One had to go back, that is Gerald Ford, because of certain issues as far as technical things are concerned, but it has now got back at Tripoli with Marines. It is getting in Boxer. So it has a sizable navy. All the technological advancements, whether it is THAAD, it is the Patriot missiles, it is your other shipborne missiles from Tomahawks, you name it, it had all of them, right? Yet, US finds itself at the back foot. It has not been able to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. It has suffered significant damage as far as its military hardware is concerned, even more damage as far as its reputation is concerned, right? So in many ways, as I would put it, if Iran wins by not losing, US loses by not winning, and US doesn't seem to be winning. What are your views?
So my views on Jack, what you just outlined is that the US has, from open sources again, about 13 bases in the Persian Gulf.
Correct.
Manned by about 50,000 people. 50,000, please, I make a distinction between combatants and people manning these bases.
Absolutely.
So they have 50,000 people in uniform, providing a host of support functions to the US forces operating there. The number of combatants actually there out of this 50,000, to my mind, would be just about 20-25% key personnel operating aircrafts and other systems, allied
Absolutely.
air defense systems,
Right.
etc. Besides that, there is a marine expeditionary force which has been moved into the region, and also some elements of the 82nd Airborne Brigade.
Airborne.
So they total up about to 7,000 combatants. So the point which I'm trying to put across is that actually, if today we take a little, we do a little analytical employment of these troops, we find that these troops are just about sufficient to be able to maybe capture a significant island with certain facilities. For example, the Khadg Islands or something
the
in
Abu Musa
Abu
or,
Musa, certain islands which will become the launching pad or provide a bridgehead for further American operations. But I think somewhere uh, there is a very clear understanding which is not been spelt out, that the Americans are not looking at employing boots on ground in the Iran conflict. That's what all the indications and the massing of forces currently has been. Secondly, you spoke about the two aircraft carrier task forces operating, large number of aircrafts operating. The problem is that because of the anti-shipping missile threat, these task forces are operating at a safe distance away from Iran. With that, what happens is that the aircrafts which are taking off from these aircraft carriers also need air-to-air refueling, etc., which we have seen because of the number of refuelers which have been moved from all over the place down in the Middle East, and so that they are being able to carry out deep strikes within Iran. That by itself limits their capabilities.
Right.
Secondly, the number of smart weapons, guided weapons, the numbers which have been used. If you go back, actually, this is what I would, in my opinion, is the second part of the US-Iran war which is unfolding. In the part one, in the 12-day operation which happened earlier,
last year, June, I think.
Yeah. So the Americans used a fair amount of firepower to demolish all the nuclear facilities.
Right.
And to quote the U.S. president's words, he says they're obliterated. They're nothing
Correct.
there, right? So with specific munitions being used to target underground facilities, the Americans that time had claimed that practically all the nuclear facilities of Iran have been destroyed.
Absolutely, especially at Fordo and Isfahan.
Natanz and Fordo, Isfahan also. And so the point which I'm trying to put across is that again now, when it comes down to the 15-point American demand, the back rolling of the nuclear option by Iran is what is really the number one agenda on the US demands. My point is that at this particular point in time, even if the Iranians, and they have said publicly that they don't want to possess nuclear weapons,
right,
and they want to have enrichment facilities only for peaceful nuclear purposes,
right,
which is their right, and nobody can deny them that right. So the point which I'm trying to put across is that just playing this nuclear card again and again, actually, the nuclear card somewhere in the list of demands has got replaced by the Strait of Hormuz, and that is where the biggest strategic miscalculation of this war has happened. Nobody imagined, or nobody had actually wargamed that during this particular process, because they thought Iran would fold in very, very easily. They had not seen this blockade happening of Strait of Hormuz and thus impacting the world economy. And now the Americans find themselves in a bind as to now how to get off and open up the Strait of Hormuz without losing face. That's exactly where we are today.
Absolutely. But Manu, if you think back, right back to your academy days, and you've seen 3 decades as far as the army is concerned in various leadership roles, among the first principles of war that we were taught was selection and maintenance of aim. Here, you started the war with basically saying, I will not let Iran become nuclear, I will get a regime change, and I will ensure that Iran can never rise again as far as the threat to Israel is concerned. From there on, there has been a constant change in the aim, and today it has become opening of Hormuz. Hormuz was always open. What are your views? Has America, despite its capabilities, despite its technological prowess, Have they lost it somewhere?
You see, Jax, I believe there have been two recent articles in the New York Times in which they talk about that the deep state within the American administration had forewarned the US president that getting into this kind of a direct assault on Iran would be counterproductive.
Right.
But the Israeli point of view, with the Mossad chief also chipping in and giving a briefing to the US president, right? Saying that we will be able to actually overwhelm them in a couple of days or maximum in weeks, and the whole country will kind of rise against the current dispensation in Iran. So the Americans have made a strategic miscalculation in this process, and now they are finding themselves in a bind. And keeping this in mind, just if you just go back to 2 days back when the U.S. president, on his Truth Social media, tweeted that the Iranians, if they don't fall into line, would be obliterated from the face of this earth.
They would go back to Stone Age.
Stone Age, right? And so, how do you send a country of 90 million people, ancient civilization, how do you wipe them off the face of the earth? Only by using specialist munitions or a nuke, which we don't want to discuss because that's actually more rhetoric than actually what was being planned.
Absolutely.
And, right? And on the following evening, you now say, okay, we are announcing a ceasefire. So between these two positions, right, we find that this rhetoric actually has been causing a lot of pain, because the aims of war, what you mentioned, starting on from regime change to capping the nuclear capabilities to sending them into Stone Age and so on and so forth, right, have actually kept changing, and that's why it's become difficult for people in the world like us to really understand as to what the American strategic game is in this in entire operations.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then, Manu, there have been some talk, or there have been some reports and some claim, very credible reports, that it was not Israel which was prompting US to act as much as was Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Do you think that is true?
Personally, I don't think so, because it is not in the interest of the GCC countries. They would have, the GCC countries, as a matter of fact, had figured out, and that's why they are looking for safe. That's why a couple of countries, like for example, Bahrain and UAE, etc., have already signed the Abraham Accord with Israel. Israel, they want peace in the region. There are GCC countries like Bahrain, which has a sizable Shia population. Right?
Yes, very much.
So they are well aware of the dynamics that today the Dubai, the status of Dubai, which is the most important airport hub in the world today, has taken a beating.
Absolutely.
The mirage of the
Stability,
of
peace
and all that has taken a beating. And as a matter of fact, I believe that we are now digressing slightly, but the impact of this particular war, even if tomorrow a ceasefire was to be reached, actually will play out very adversely for the GCC countries, at least for 6 to 8 months or a year, till the time they stabilize again. So the point which I'm trying to put across is that I do not think that Saudi Arabia would be interested. As a matter of fact, their own oil facilities and gas facilities have been hit, and I believe about 20% of their refining capability has also been hit. And they would have known that in this kind of a situation, collateral damage will occur, and the collateral damage has occurred for Qatar, it has occurred for Saudi Arabia, it has occurred for all the GCC countries, and so this actually, in my understanding, this is a war which Israel has been wanting for the last 40 years under Bibi Netanyahu, right? And he managed to convince the current US dispensation that they need to go in for this war, and it has had very, very disastrous fallout. But the only country which actually gains partly out of this is Israel, because from last about 2.5 to 3 years after the moment the Gaza operation started, they in a very, very systematic manner have gone around degrading the proxies of Iran all around Israel. And when they found that they have managed to weaken them up beyond a point, Then they said now is the time is ripe to actually go and hit the main adversary, which is Iran, which is the
head of the snake.
Head of the snake. So this is what they have, what they had planned, and this is what has followed. But unfortunately, they have managed to decapitate a lot of people and regimes leaders. But the head of the snake has like more like an octopus has managed to actually reform, and Khamenei has been replaced by his own son Khamenei, and maybe a more radical regime has replaced the older regime, right? So we'll see how it pans out. We'll see how it pans
This
out.
is like the Rakt Beach, which was as said
Absolutely.
in the Mahabharata.
Absolutely.
But you have covered the third major combatant, which is Israel, very well, even while we were not directly talking about it. But just to encapsulate, Israel faces a real terms existential crisis as far as Iran is concerned, with Iran's stated aim of obliterating Israel. The aim of Hamas and Hezbollah, as far as their websites itself is there, it says death to the Jew, and we want to eliminate all Jews and Israel. Iran routinely shouts out in cities and streets in their parliament, saying death to America, death to Israel. So Israel has that one problem. Secondly, Israel.
Could I give you a different perspective on that?
Please do that.
See, the physical distance between the closest portion of Israel and Iran is about 1150 kilometers. They are
not right next to each other.
They are not next to each other, right? And they have a large number of buffer states in between. So whereas the Iranians have also adopted a lot of rhetoric against the Israelis also have a concept called the Hasbara. Hasbara stands for public diplomacy. So they have also managed because of their control and their influence over media channels of all kinds, that they have managed to convince the world that actually Iran is the main destabilizer. And here I would like to mention that why do the GCC countries partly agree with this? The reason why after the Islamic Revolution, the Shah of Iran was kicked out because he had wanted to modernize Iran at a very, very fast pace, point number one. Point number two, the introduction of Western ideals and concepts by him were did not find favor with the larger Iranian population because they were maybe ahead of their time at that particular point in time. Now, moment the mullahs in Iran took power, they wanted that all the monarchies in the GCC countries, right? They feel that their top leaders are actually leading a kind of a life because of their money and influence, which is not prescribed by Islam. So they also felt that the natural resources of these countries are being harnessed by their rulers, right, for their own personal comforts and ayashi in Hindi, right? And so they said that as a matter of fact, they need to have a similar kind of a revolution whereby the power goes back and these countries also adopt an Islamic way of life. So these countries, for example, in Saudi Arabia, we are now again slightly digressing, but the difference, the religious entities have been given freedom in specific areas, whereas otherwise all political leverage has been kept by the ruling family, by the ruling family.
Absolutely.
Right. So you must make. So all these GCC countries felt actually threatened by the success of the
Iranian
revolution because they thought that if this kind of a revolution or thought processes spreads locally amongst the Arab countries, right, that would be the end of these monarchies. So it has to be seen in that particular perspective as to why Iran is being labeled as the great serpent and the whole world has, whereas Iran till date has never attacked the country. Even the current war, the Iranians were not the first attackers.
They didn't strike first.
They didn't strike first, right? So not that we are in any case, we are taking a little, these are personal views. So the point which I'm trying to play, that Iranians have been painted in black,
Painted black.
in black by various Western influencers, right? To say that this country is unreliable, whereas we all know till 1947 Iran was a neighbor of India. For last 250 years, Persian was the official language of the Mughal court here in India, right? So we have very close ties with the Iranians, and so the point which I'm trying to put across is that they are not what they are being made out to be, as a matter of fact. But once you are pushed against the wall, and today they are fighting for their own existence, right? So you have to see these things in a slightly balanced form. That's the
Right.
point which I'm trying to put across.
Absolutely. See, if you find Iran fighting for its existence,
Correct.
you have on the other side Israel saying, I am fighting for my existence because I am surrounded by the Hamas, the Hezbollah, the Houthis are
Correct.
firing rockets at me.
Correct.
The GCC countries themselves, they are predominantly, all the monarchs are Sunni. Each of those countries has a sizable Shia population.
Correct.
And they feel threatened, and therefore they have an existential crisis as far as the Shia Iran is concerned. Because if Iran becomes a regional power, and if it starts flexing muscles the way others are, then they have a problem. The GCC countries have another issue now, especially with the Straits of Hormuz getting closed. They are dependent on the Straits of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia has a major dependency, 50% plus, on the Straits of Hormuz, whether it is for their exports of oil and gas and petroleum products or import of food and other things. Similarly, Qatar has 60%. Bahrain probably is the least of the leveraged ones at 20%. But you have UAE at 35%, Kuwait at 60%. The, why are there some countries less? Because they have diversified into financials. Because so many of the financial institutions have got their headquarters in this part of the world. Tech companies are coming here in a very big way. And the Arab nations or the GCC nations are all trying to transform themselves into different areas so that in case oil gets over, which it will at some point in time in the future, then we must have something else as far as our economy is concerned. But since they are all dependent on the Straits of Hormuz, and if Iran lands up with controlling the Straits of Hormuz, what do you think is going to be the impact on the GCC?
Frankly, Jax, you have to see this in a slightly different, through a slightly different prism. And I take you back about 2-3 years back. The role of China in this region is becoming very important. As a matter of fact, they have stepped in and they have managed to bring Saudi Arabia and Iran close.
Right.
The Iranians established an embassy in Saudi Arabia a couple of years back.
That's correct.
Because of the Chinese influence, right?
Yeah, they signed the peace pipe together.
Peace pipe together.
Yeah.
So the point which I'm trying to put across is actually for the GCC countries and for Iran, the Strait of Hormuz needs to be open, and so this is a common national interest, both sides of the strait. Point number one. So it is in nobody's interest, neither in Iran's interest nor in the interest of the GCC countries, to kind of stifle or in any which way block the Strait of Hormuz, because all revenues, whether to the GCC countries or to Iran, right, will come only once the oil and gas flows through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
Right. So it is not in the interest of either the GCC countries or Iran to block the Strait of Hormuz. And even today, Iranians have been claiming that the Strait of Hormuz, sir, today is also open. It is not closed. Technically, it is not closed. But they said, all the countries who are against us in this particular war, because of these operations going on, we are trying to actually stifle or limit their capability because of what is happening against us, right? So the point which you are trying to put across is that, as I see it, were it not for the US influence, bases in the region, the Israeli kind of interventions with these countries, peace could actually prevail between the Arabs and the Iranians, because they have very common long-term interests, and stability on both sides, right, will actually help them develop the region further.
Is that the reason why? Because this is a wonder which I have. You know, you've been studying this for a while. The GCC countries have got probably the most modern air forces in the world.
Correct.
They have the more technologically advanced weapons, from air defense to ships even, but they have all been missing in action. Why?
They have been reluctant bystanders because, like the rest of the world, first of all, they were not taken on board when the Americans went in the second time.
Right.
And secondly, they also thought that with the overwhelming military power of the US and Israelis combined together, that Iran would collapse. That has not happened. That has come as a surprise to everybody, including the GCC nations, right? And now their capacity of Iran to be able to cause damage in GCC countries, which is again be very, very selectively targeted. As a matter of fact, those certain public utilities, oil and gas plants have been hit, but they have been more a tit for tat kind of reactions. Moment something in Iran gets hit, then a corresponding target across the strait is getting hit. It is not that they have gone whole hog to destroy the public utilities, which they can easily do, especially their water salination plants, electrical utilities, buildings, etc., could be targeted by Iran very, very easily. And as a matter of fact, going forward, now that these peace talks have collapsed, we must understand, we must discuss, and this is like doing crystal gazing, as to what do you think will be the American reaction now? Will they
We'll
now
come back to that in a while.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Okay.
But out here, one thing what you're saying makes it very clear to me. One, military capability is not equal to strategic deterrence.
No?
Second, you may have military capability if you do not have the will to use it. It's pointless. And lastly, the asymmetric warfare which started, if you will, with Ukraine, where they started using a fair amount of asymmetric warfare as far as Russia is concerned. The same thing Iran is showing by the fact that it has these cheap Shahid drones and it just swarms a particular location, the air defense is swamped, and even if 1%, 5% go through, they still cause significant damage.
As a matter of fact, when you spoke about strategic deterrence, in my humble understanding, the Americans have actually unsheathed a strategic deterrence and presented it to Iran, because till now the Strait of Hormuz was never really considered a strategic deterrence or a deterrent, right? So now the way this war has panned out, the Americans have actually handed over a major strategic
trump card
to the Iranians
and said, "Beta, isko istemal kar."
and who are flouting it, and who now have said not only are they owning the Strait of Hormuz, they said actually our repatriations for the damage which you guys have caused will now come from here. The other day I was reading a very interesting article which they said today Panama, for example, collects a toll or a bounty of about $5 billion for the annual passage of ships through the Panama Canal.
Right.
Egypt collects about $10 billion through the Suez Canal every year. The bounty which is likely to come Iran's way, should they start collecting toll through the Strait of Hormuz, is likely to be $80 to $90 billion. So it's about 8 to 9 times actually the
damage in Iran in 1 year.
In 1 year. So that's why I said the strategic deterrent actually, which was lying sheaths all this while, has actually been unsheathed by the US and Israel and handed over to the Iranians, who now, when they own it, right, they now feel that they're holding certain cards on which they have total control and nobody can do anything to them.
Let's move on to China,
Okay.
because we spoke about China, where you did mention.
Okay.
China did try to flex its muscles here, especially after the US did its pivot to the east, as they called it, and started moving some assets out of the Persian Gulf, post the Abrahamic Accords and I2U2 and all of that started happening. So they said, okay, we don't need to be here so much. China entered. It went into a multi-year, 10-year partnership with Iran, and they said we'll have a $400 billion whatever, right? It came up with the Iran-Saudi rapprochement. Yet, whether it was the 2025 war in June or January this year or now, China by and large has been missing in action. It has been there at the background, not in the foreground. It was missing in action whether it was Venezuela also. It was not directly come up, other than making some statement here, some statement there, which mean nothing. China really has not been able to do anything much
I
here.
beg to differ there slightly with you. As a matter of fact, the current round of talks which were held in Islamabad as we speak yesterday would not have been possible without the Chinese influence. The Pakistanis could get the GCC countries, and as a matter of fact, the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia and even Iran, which was reluctant to come on board, was nudged, in my understandings, very silently, because there was a very interesting kind of record of the number of meetings which the Chinese foreign minister has been holding for the past about maybe 5 to 6 weeks with the key players. And so China has actually been playing all the buttons. And earlier you had mentioned about relocation of THAAD batteries, Patriots, etc. Where have they been relocated from? As a matter of fact, those THAAD batteries have been moved from South Korea. They are
That's
moving,
right.
moved from Japan, and they have been flown into Middle East now to protect the centers of gravity of the GCC countries. So it is, I won't say it is in China's interest, because it is not in anybody's interest, either China or India's interest. If oil and gas supplies get disrupted, they adverse impact us also in India and in China adversely. But the moving of key US forces or key weapon systems from East Asia into the Middle East actually has so the pivot was supposed to be away from pivot was supposed to be into Asia, away from Middle East and Europe. The Americans supposed
Pivoted back
to, it
into
is now pivoted back. So this is actually one of the, what should I say again, areas where the Americans have kind of misjudged the strategic calculus which is at play, in my understanding.
Yeah, that's true. Because see, Chinese vulnerability,
Correct.
or the biggest vulnerability, is
Correct.
oil.
Correct.
It gets almost 75% of its oil consumption. Of that comes mainly from the Middle East. It needs about 12 million barrels a day. Right? Middle East accounts for about 60% of this. Venezuela used to account for about 5%. Russia 20%. Now Venezuelan oil is gone. Russia's oil, which it was getting at a discount, it is now at market price. So cheap oil is gone again. Iranian oil is also now more or less stopped, because Iran also now realizes that it needs the money. And China, really speaking, if you had Pezeshkian's words himself, he said we expected a lot of financial help from from China, but it never came. And this was just around the start of the war, the current one, that is. So Chinese interests have been hit quite badly. Don't forget, $250 billion of trade happens between China and the GCC. It's just about 30 billion with Iran. And Chinese assets, especially on the BRI side, have been hit by Iran in the current war. So China stands to lose the most. So if China is trying to push its interest forward, it is not very surprising. But then, other than statements, China, really speaking, has not provided direct military support to Iran during the crisis. Undoubtedly, there are reports of 5 shiploads of sodium perchlorate having reached Iran through various places. There are reports that the Shahid drone manufacturer, the controlling chips, the ICs, and all that, they've all come from China, and they've all come from via multiple hands in Hong Kong. Right? All that is true. But China directly, when whatever weapons they supplied, have failed. They supplied the anti-ship missiles, they failed. Not one got through. They supplied a fair amount of other hardware, which by and large has failed. So what do you think is Chinese role, and do you think Chinese stature in the Gulf has reduced?
My take on this is, let's start from the macro level. The resolution which the Americans had moved in the Security Council actually got vetoed out both by the Russians and the Chinese.
Right.
Correct. So that was put aside. The other part is that China is also today fully aware that whatever kind of help it is, if it extends to Iran, is being monitored by the US. So
Right.
the as per social media reports, help is being given to Iran through third partner countries, and there are overland routes actually linking the railway lines, for example, link Iran with China.
Which that's
with
true.
China.
That's the BRI and
Yeah,
this thing.
yeah. And not only that, the Russians and the Chinese have adopted a strategy to be helping out Iran, giving them intelligence support, and there are talks about which that the cyber warfare component, actually a lot of help is being given by the Chinese and the Russians to the Iranians, right? So that those kind of disruptions have not taken place. We'll see now that with the failing of these talks, what awaits us in days to come, because we are very clear that the military capability of Iran has got degraded significantly. So now whatever is going to be utilized, or whatever is the remnant military capability in terms of drones, missiles, and other out of area forces which they are controlling, let us see as to what options the Iranians have. And for them to be using these forces effectively, they will require a lot of intelligence to be targeting those economic centers of gravity of the GCC countries, or Israel, or the US in the region. So that kind of back-end support is being given
Right.
to Iran by both China and Russia together.
Right. Going by the back-end support, you have the back-end support by Russia also.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
But Russia seems to be one clear winner. Its oil, which was sanctioned, is
Absolutely.
off sanctions now.
Absolutely.
Prices have gone up, that means its realizations have gone up.
Correct.
Right. Discounts have finished.
Correct.
Right. Yet, in this, there is a dark cloud. That dark cloud is Ukraine. Ukraine has targeted 4 refineries of Russia so hard that those refineries are shut down. Russia has stopped supplying petroleum products to the Europe and everywhere else. From the 1st of April, they've said no more of that. We can sell you oil. Right? So that's one problem with them. The second is Russia, because its oil products are not going to go to Europe, has given Europe a problem, because they now have to buy either expensive US products or has to fight with India in India for the extra petroleum products that we are making, because our refining capability is 11 million barrels a day. Our consumption is 5.5, which means we have 5.5, 6 million barrels equivalent that we can sell. We are selling to US, we are selling to Europe, we are also selling to Ukraine.
But Jack, you must remember that whatever we were selling to Europe earlier was Russian oil, which was getting refined in Jamnagar and being supplied to Europe. Once the sanctions came in, India was told very clearly that you please desist from buying Russian oil. Now, because of the current war which is happening, the US has given us a 30-day freedom of
See, that
sanction.
waiver started very recently.
Very recently.
Okay, even the sanctions happened very recently.
Correct. So 30 days waiver is the only waiver which has been granted, as a matter of fact.
I don't think this waiver is going back.
Yeah, and the second part is, ships are not standing around the corner. When a 30-day waiver is announced, that suddenly you can have 20 ships laden with oil coming into Jamnagar or Kandla. It doesn't happen like that, right? These ships are loaded at a particular point. They will take some time before orders are placed and before the oil gets delivered. The point which I'm trying to put across is that India actually, in the current situation, we may find that because of our imports getting hit from the Middle East, we are not really in a position to be now supplying oil to Europe. So Europe is the oil prices in Europe and energy prices in Europe, in UK, even in the US, which is oil exporting country, because the international prices are all linked. That is actually a cause of concern, and the inflation even in US is rising because of higher energy prices.
Right.
That's panning out all over the world. That's
Absolutely. So that brings us to the final chapter in this part, and that is Pakistan, the ultimate rentier state, the ultimate juggler. It has successfully done this juggling around and renting itself out since independence. In the current situation, it has a defense pact with Saudi Arabia. There are reports now that they have sent some aircraft, JF-17 Thunder, to Saudi Arabia, and they have landed there. They have very good relations with Iran. It's a love-hate relationship, but There is that nonetheless. In Pakistani economy, especially its black market oil economy, was all on smuggled Iranian oil. That is why you have Fazlur Rahman being called Maulana Diesel. Right? Pakistan faces enough and more problems within itself. It has a sizable Shia population. It cannot be seen going against Iran. But if it goes with Saudi Arabia, it is seen as going with the ultimate of all Satans, US and the Chota Sa Shaitan, that is Israel. How do you see Pakistan's role in the current crisis, and where do you see it going forward?
See, the Pakistanis, we may call them by any which names, The point is that they have seized this opportunity, and they have seized this opportunity with full support from China. As a matter of fact, they have become the front face of the Chinese silent diplomacy, if I may use that word. And they have managed to actually influence countries in the GCC, Iran, the US, with whom the Pakistan policymakers, basically their army chief, the field marshal, and the prime minister have good relations, right? And so Pakistani approach always has been transactional. But the mere fact that they managed to get all the key personnel to speak, countries to speak to each other, right? Whereas other countries of the world, for example, the Europeans are nowhere involved in these talks. Neither are big countries, even from the BRICS side, including India, right? We are playing no active role. We may be passively supporting all this. So the only country which could have played this kind of a role, in my mind, especially because of the Islamic connections, could have been either Turkey or Pakistan. And here you realize,
Egypt?
Egypt, yes, but Egypt is actually very closely linked with the GCC countries. Egypt actually, Chaks, having studied the region.
Friends, I must here mention, Manu has spent a long time in Israel. He's got a number of degrees from there, including your
I had the privilege of doing my MA in political science from Haifa University, and also working with the IDF. Right. So one has been in that region, and one understands the point is that any countries in the world, and for that matter, we must. Why I say that is because it impacts us directly. The biggest resource that any country has is demography, and the biggest country, Arab country, Egypt, actually has been there. It is the Cairo University is the fountainhead of knowledge in the Arab world, number one. And all the GCC countries, large number of Egyptians work, and as a matter of fact, like Pakistan, the Egyptians provide the backbone to the GCC countries in a large number of areas, including military. So that part of that particular profile of Egypt is not well known to the rest of us who are not in the region, right? But otherwise, Egypt plays a very, very important role, and being the biggest Sunni country in the region has a huge influence. So you're right, Egypt could have played that role, but Egypt's relationships with Iran, I am not really at this particular. I have not really studied that.
They don't have much.
They don't have much. So there had to be a country which had good relationships with both the belligerents on both the sides. So that country, that's why I just named Turkey
and Pakistan
and Pakistan. And Pakistanis, I think, have played their part well, and as they have been extremely proactive. If you go by the Pakistani social media, they're really all the three key personnel there. Their Field Marshal Munir, the Prime Minister Sharif, and the Foreign Minister Dhar. All three have actually engaged in intense diplomacy with all the stakeholders and getting people who are very, very how do I put it across, not so easy to deal with, because they can change their position from morning till evening, especially the current key decision makers in the American administration.
Yeah, right? That of course is
so it is there. So people had to go, actually, I believe, and while doing all this, they had to keep the Chinese in the loop, because it was the Chinese initiatives which were actually which were being done
Fronted by Pakistan.
fronted by Pakistan. So Pakistan has managed to salvage its international standing to some extent, right? And even today, while departing, J.D. Vance made a mention
Of Pakistan in
made a mention of this. So they have been proactive, and I think this has been a small coup. Had the talk succeeded, it would have been a very large
Very
coup,
big one.
very big one. But I think their efforts have borne fruit in this area.
Right. This gives a very interesting segue into the peace talks itself. See, the war has been on. The Iran-Israel has been on for a long time now. They have been at each other's throats, various reasons, right or wrong, will not go there. But it has been there. In this current situation, for the first time, a war between two nations became virtually engulfing the world in some form or the other, impacting every person's life in some form or the other. Therefore, let's get to the peace talks itself. Tell me, what do you think were the key points in which Iran and America started talking, in your opinion? Let's not go into the 15-point plan and 10-point plan, because there are various versions of, as per J.D. Vance himself, there are at least 3 versions of a 10-point plan.
Correct.
There were some versions of the American plan also.
Correct.
But in your opinion, if there were 3 or 4 or 5 major key points, what do you think these were for the peace talks?
See, the Americans would like the nuclear capability of Iran defanged.
Right.
Nuclear
No
Iran is
uncertainty.
not acceptable.
Correct.
Number one. Number two, they wanted to also defang their missile capability, which has now been causing a lot of grief to GCC countries and Israel.
And Israel.
And Israel.
And threatened to America because they want to do an
Absolutely.
ICBM.
Absolutely. The third part is that the Americans were very deeply concerned about the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, right? So they wanted a position whereby the Iranians gave it in writing to say that in no which way would they interfere with the functioning of the vessels in Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
That was the third point. And the fourth point was that they would stop interfering and threatening the infrastructure of the GCC countries, right? Because for the GCC countries, this is a very important clause.
Right.
So these three.
But what about Israel?
Israel, like I told you, Israel is far away from Iran. Secondly, Israel today is in a position militarily where it has the defensive capability of taking on the Iranians. And the Iranians also know that, backed by the US, they are in no position to really be able to cause damage beyond a point to Israel. So that kind of a reality or that kind of a strategic balance exists between the two countries, right? So though public posturing is different, the public posturing by Israelis is different, by the Iranians is different, right? But they also are wary and they know that both can cause deep amount of pain to each other. So that kind of brings in a certain amount of balance. So these I thought were the 4-5 major points in this region, as I understand it. And the Israelis actually were playing a trump card, because 2 years when the fighting was going on in Gaza, they have managed to very severely degrade the Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic groups operating in Syria and also in Iraq. So all these entities which are backed by Iran have been significantly weakened by Israel. And so Israelis thought that this is a good time, since their proxies have taken they're on the run. This is a good time now to hit their mentors, the Iranians, in their backyard.
And they took the same playbook and knocked the leadership off.
So it happened. But to everybody's surprise, the collapse of Iran didn't happen. And as a matter of fact, the resolve and resilience today, right, has come as a surprise to very many countries. That there are a number of reasons actually why, from a war which was supposed to be a war of shock and awe, in the sense that everything would be over within a week, it has dragged on now for about 30-40 days, point number one. And it has now slowly turned into a war of attrition. When it turns into a war of attrition, both sides will keep hammering each other, causing damage, right? Which is helping nobody, and the world economy itself is also getting hit. It is also getting hit. So that is where we stand today. And so there's no off-ramping for the Americans to be claiming victory, because the Iranians have not agreed to any of these 4-5 points which I just spoke about. And as a matter of fact, like we discussed earlier, they have been given a deterrence, a strategic deterrence.
Yeah, they got two trump cards now.
Have been given to them, right? So the Strait of Hormuz is actually become a vital waterway for the entire world, and so everybody is pressurizing, including the U.S. citizens within U.S. To say that this war is extremely unpopular, and the ratings have been falling for the president everywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, when we start talking about this, and you spoke about the trump card that Iran has been given, that is the Straits of Hormuz. Frankly speaking, if you start comparing the Straits of Hormuz with the other major straits, the, at the narrowest, the Straits of Hormuz are about 30 kilometers. At the narrowest, the Malacca Straits is 2.8 kilometers. At the narrowest, the Gibraltar is 23 kilometers. The Malacca Straits at the narrowest, with the Phillip Channel, is entirely in the territorial waters of Singapore. If Iran starts collecting toll in the Straits of Hormuz, what stops Singapore from collecting tolls in the Malacca? If you take the difference between the two of them, if you think Straits of Hormuz is the oil pipeline of the world, then the Malacca is your bloodstream itself, because Malacca counts for approximately $6 to $6.5 trillion of trade passes through here. Hormuz is just under 1 trillion. About 20,000 ships pass through Hormuz, 100,000 ships pass through Malacca.
So, checks the point which you see that freedom of navigation, as per the international,
As per UNCLOS,
as per
that's
the,
right.
So is supposed to be ingrained without any conditions attached.
Correct.
That's point number one.
Correct.
The point number two is what makes when I was reading up of the Strait of Hormuz, I believe their inbound channel is about 2 nautical miles wide.
Right.
They have a buffer in between of again 2 nautical miles, and there's an outbound channel. So there is a channel which is, because the depth of the Strait of Hormuz varies from about 30-40 feet to about maybe about 300 to 400 feet in the deep channel. So where the VLCCs, the very large crude carriers, can actually operate are midstream, and those channels are limited, though the physical width of the Strait of Hormuz may be whatever it is. And towards, I believe, because of the way the continental shelf is aligned, the depth is more towards the side of the GCC countries vis-a-vis the Iranian side. The Iranian side is shallower. Why I make this point is, the Iranians have almost about 115 to 120 kind of midget submarines operating. In all this rhetoric coming out of Washington, we have heard repeatedly that the entire Iranian navy has been destroyed. But when I was actually preparing for this little talk, we found that the number of midget submarines which have actually been taken out and have been actually declared so by various electronic means is only 1 or 2 out of the 115 to 120. So these guys are actually they are capable of operating very close from the shore on the Iranian side, going and laying mines and falling back very, very easily. So some amount of mining, I believe, has already been done by the Iranians.
Right.
So you being a naval person,
submariner at that,
submariner at that, so you would actually be able to shed more light. But I was quite it was quite surprising to know that the midget submarine fleet of the Iranians, primarily even today by all open source intelligence estimates, appears to be intact. And so they are capable of disrupting the Strait of Hormuz by all kinds of means, subsurface, on the surface, direct firing weapon systems, and so on and so forth. So this threat is actually what is giving Iranians the staying power to be able to regulate the flow of traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. Whereas other channels which are which you made a mention of, whether it is Malacca Straits, those are in any way they are open channels, so they are not really being contested by various countries.
Precisely. Hormuz is also an open channel.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
It has now got contested.
Correct. Correct.
Which basically comes down to the fact
Correct.
that among the key lessons that one has to learn from here
Correct.
is you should not only be able to influence a choke point, but you should be able to manage that choke point, which means a focus into the Navy, which effectively brings down to the fact that the Indian Ocean region, because we have the entry into the Indian Ocean region, if you remove the Cape of Good Hope part away, the Straits of Hormuz, the Straits of Bab el Mandab, and the exit from the Malacca. If India has to feel that India is controlling or India is the master or at least we are a key player in the Indian Ocean region, then we must be able to manage these three straits. The Malacca we can with the Great Nicobar Island, the Diglipur, and the new port that we are coming up with in Galathia Bay. We are in some way able to manage the Straits of Hormuz. We have not played a military role there, but with a port in Duqm and our naval ships in that area, as well as the Straits of Bab el Mandab, because that's where we managed to curb the piracy in that part. And we are looked upon as one set of people who are very respected. So one lesson we learned there. The second lesson we come from here is asymmetric warfare, which is key. A third important lesson is the fact that even a very weak nation, Iran was not considered a very strong nation, right? Militarily, it, I think, ranked about 17th, 18th in the entire hierarchy. US was number one. Israel was also high up. The GCC countries, if you total up their military might, they become, it's a David versus Goliath.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And David won.
Absolutely.
Right. Net, we come down to the fact that we started with, if you will, Iran wins by not losing. US loses by not winning. Pakistan is an effing middling country. What about India?
I would, not that I'm trying to put in a smart statement, but the whole world loses as long as these two are fighting. So whether whoever wins or loses actually is a different aspect. But the whole world, world economy is getting adversely
hammered, absolutely hammered,
impacted. As a matter of fact, if these issues are not quickly resolved, they can push the entire world into an economic depression. You know?
Absolutely. I was reading one report in which somebody did a back of the envelope calculation and said the world GDP will drop by at least 0.6 to 0.7% by just 1 month of closure of Straits of Hormuz.
Correct.
If that is the global impact, and then you have the law of unintended consequences, because you try to threaten oil, but your gas is gone, fertilizer, helium, coking coal, you name it, each of these things having an impact as far as the global market is concerned.
So, what it really brings us down to is that all our lives, professional lives, we kept hearing about this rule-based international order. Now, when you start playing around with the rules and start flouting of the rules by powers that be, right, then there are going to be severe disruptions, which are happening, which we can see happening. So the rules which were actually made post Second World War by the victors, and the Western powers were the victors.
Absolutely.
Those rules which were made by them to keep control of the entities are today being flouted with impunity by the powers that be, because today, by all legal, technical parameters, this is an unjust war heaped by a powerful adversary on another country, right? When there was actually no reason for it to go to war. So the point which I'm trying to put across is that we are in choppy waters. This kind of very narrow focus on narrow national interests, as long as they remain, they will bring in clash of powers. And what has changed in the world in the last 100 to 150 years is that this was also happening in the last century and the century before that. But the number of players there were limited. Today what has happened is, because of the strength, military strength getting more diffused around the world, like you mentioned, even asymmetric powers can bring a lot of grief to the big players,
Right.
which America has been realizing, whether in Afghanistan and now it is realizing in Iran.
Iran.
In Iran.
Russia did in Ukraine.
Russia did in Ukraine, right?
And China may well end up with Taiwan in the similar vein.
If it decides to go into
If it
Taiwan,
decides.
I mean, that is the point which I want to put across is that asymmetric means can also bring a very very powerful adversary onto his knees, right? And and wars, you can start a war, but it will always have unintended consequences will follow, which none of us can predict, and nobody had actually even 30 days back, frankly, now that we're talking maybe 30 to 40 days little later, nobody had anticipated that this kind of a resolve and resilience can be shown by the Iranians.
Absolutely.
Right? And today, I won't say they're in the driver's seat, right? But they are.
But they hold cards.
But they are partly controlling the narrative, though being very weak. And I think
Absolutely.
that's amazing. It's amazing.
Absolutely. You know, one thing which drives home very, very clearly with this is the fact that the Iranian people, their voice has not been heard
Correct.
at all.
Correct.
It has been the IRGC on one side.
Correct.
It has been the Trump and Netanyahu, the MBZs of the world on the other side. There have been some quiet, silent players like Xi Jinping, Asif Munir, and Shehbaz Sharif, and you name it, or all of them, playing some role or the other. But the key persons who have actually taken the biggest hit are the Iranian people. Their voice is not known. You have the IRGC, which is controlling Iran. It's more or less a wartime situation there. People have come together under the flag. Do you think there is a case that one can say IRGC may well end up breaking, or Iran may end up breaking, because once it transitions into a less than war situation, which if this 2 weeks ceasefire, if it holds, and if America is smart, it may well hold on to the ceasefire and let Iran crumble on its own weight. Do you think there's a case like that?
Frankly, I don't see. There are no internal contradictions as far as Iran is concerned. And secondly, the Iranians from 1979 onwards have been under, if you actually go into the history, I think from Lord's year of 1980 onwards, they have been under some kind of sanctions.
Sanction or the other. Always under sanctions.
Always.
They've never been off sanctions.
They have never been off sanctions.
Absolutely.
And they've also endured an 8-year war
with Iraq.
With Iraq.
Which is a bad one.
Which is a very bad one.
Khurram Shah was renamed Kunni Shah, if you remember.
Absolutely. And so to my mind, Iran is actually maybe as a nation, right? Because nations also, people's will get welded together in a time of crisis. If Iran comes out of on top during this conflict, which it just might, because though it's a weaker party, it may just end up, if it can partially have its sanctions rolled back, partly its frozen accounts money released, it is in some manner reintegrated into the regional economy or the world economy. If these 2-3 things happen, it will be a big win for Iranians, and they will be beholden to the current regime. So, as a matter of fact, I really personally, I do not see Iran fragmenting into different entities as we speak. But again, these are just perceptions.
Only time tells.
Time tells.
So, my dear friends, this has been the most interesting, most illuminating conversation with General Kalon and Manu, my dear friend, my coursemate. And believe me, we have done this conversation impromptu, with no real preparation in that sense. One thing is very, very clear. The world is changing. The global power is shifting. And as global power shifts, as the world shifts, countries, nations have to change, have to shift, and have to readjust according to the current situation. Today we see something happening. Whether it will happen, it will continue the way we feel it will, is something only time will tell. Till then, please leave a like and share this video with your friends. We will break this up into a number of smaller parts so it becomes easy for you to study and read in, understand in smaller bits. Till then, till next video, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you. Thanks, Jax.
Thank you, Manu.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks.